Molly, and thank you everyone for joining. Um, it is a really it's a big honor to be here with you today. I feel hopeful about our country. It's been a wonderful start to our morning, and it's a little bit hard to go on a Zoom presentation after the president has been sworn in, and we've had such a wonderful day in our country. But I am here today to talk to you about an important set of topics, and that is around burnout, compassion fatigue, and secondary traumatization. As Molly shared with you, this training series is brought to you through a grant by ACEs Aware. We are sharing 5 webinars and a best practices paper on ACEs implementation and screening. The goal of this grant is to increase provider knowledge and training on ACEs screening, implementation, and related issues. And if you haven't been able to join us yet before today, or you would like to join us in the future, we have 3 upcoming webinars in the months to follow in February on the 17th, April 22nd, and on June 24th. We look forward to having you participate if you're able. Our training objectives today are as follows. I will share a very brief review of the ACEs science and toxic stress. I will differentiate between burnout, compassion fatigue, and secondary trauma. We'll talk a little bit about the signs and symptoms and triggers for these topics. I will be sharing a self-assessment. We will not be going through it today, but we'll talk about some of the screening and implications, and you are welcome to use it yourself. And I will share the slides with you afterwards, and the reference for that assessment will be in that slide, and information about how you can retrieve it. And then we'll talk about some self-care and resilience building strategies. Just a quick note about the Center for Youth Wellness and our origins. We were founded in 2012 by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who many of you know is our first and current Surgeon General of the state of California. The Center for Youth Wellness has really led the conversation on adverse childhood experiences. Dr. Burke-Harris really brought the topic to the forefront through her TED Talk and public awareness campaign that has been shared throughout the country. The Center for Youth Wellness itself works to help patients and families in the Bayview Hunters Point area of San Francisco, and we do that in collaboration by providing direct mental health care to patients in collaboration with Bayview Child Health Center, a federally qualified health center. And we really work within that community to provide multifaceted programming and to implement what we call the ecosystem of care. So the ecosystem model that CYW works to implement in communities, not only in the Bayview area, but across the country, really looks at ways to partner with not only medical providers and clinics, but also community-based organizations to provide the wraparound care that patients and families need after they've been screened, and then also to engage the community to build not only policy change, but also advocacy that can help further medical and community-based care within that community, so that it is a revolving and ever-evolving circle of care that grows and expands and becomes more and more trauma-informed and whole person-centered as implementation progresses. So just a couple of quick comments about ACEs in general to kind of ground us in why talking about burnout and compassion fatigue are so very important. And that is really to think about For those of us who are serving in this type of a work environment, ACEs are very common. We know that almost 50% of the country has at least one ACE, and we know that for many patients who and families that experience ACEs, such as the 10 core ACEs identified here from the original Folletti study, they can have significant impact on their ability to fight off stress and can influence and impact the experience that they may have around toxic stress. So the 10 core ACEs are centered around abuse, both physical, emotional, and sexual, neglect, both physical and emotional, and items of household instability, such as mental illness, having an incarcerated relative, substance abuse. In the original study, it identified mothers treated violently, but now we identify that as domestic partner abuse. And in the original study, it identified divorce. And now we look at that in a more broad term as parental separation or ongoing conflict within the relationship that would interfere with parenting. We also know that there are community ACEs. So not only do we think about the ACEs that one experiences individually, but there are certainly community ACEs that we're all experiencing right now. Between the pandemic and the civil unrest, injustice and inequity that we are seeing within our country, seeing portrayed in the media, and experiencing in a much more overt way as a global society, it begins to really take a toll. And so the feeling that not only are we experiencing things individually, but the combination of those events being played out in our community are very taxing to both our health and well-being, but also taxing for those of us who provide care and service to those individuals in the community that may be experiencing high rates of individual ACEs. So what is the toll? We know for patients who experience 4 or more ACEs, there is a significant correlation between the top 10 causes of death. For 7 out of 10 of those, there is a direct link with 4 or more ACEs. And as you can see in this slide, if you have experienced 4 or more ACEs, you're 11 times more likely to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's. You're 30 times more likely to attempt suicide. And overall, when you combine these health disparity or health outcomes, negative health outcomes, it can mean a difference of a 20-year life expectancy, again, without intervention to deal with the toxic stress. So we know and have data that beckons us now more than ever to intervene early in the relationship with adverse childhood experiences, toxic stress, and long-term health outcomes. So the charge is clear for providers, medical providers, and mental health providers and community-based organizations. I think under the leadership of Dr. Burke Harris and others, there's little discussion anymore, certainly in the state of California, but actually growing across the country. There's little debate necessary that early intervention is needed. Now we need to shift our attention to what is the cost of that early intervention on our providers and our community-based organizations. So I'd like to talk for a few minutes about these key terms and differentiate between the topics that I'm covering today, because while most of the literature does not do a good job in breaking out and differentiating between burnout, compassion fatigue, and secondary or vicarious trauma, it's important for us to understand the differences, because really the interventions and the way in which you address these issues can be handled very, very differently when you do have a full understanding of the changes in between them. So I'm going to start out at the bottom and talk a little bit about burnout. So burnout is the stress that providers experience related to their workplace. And it often comes into play when there's a gap in the organization's values and goals and the individuals, or if there's a gap in the way that the organization carries out or fails to carry out their values and goals and the individual's own personal values and goals. Oftentimes it's brought out by organizations that are either not very trauma informed or they're not practicing in a very trauma informed way. And so employees may feel pressure regarding changing their practice regularly, or poor quality in the work environment, lack of respect, or even pay inequity or economic insecurity within their job. But burnout is importantly associated with where one works. And so the hope is, as we work within our country to become more and more trauma informed, the ideal is that we will eliminate the cause for burnout more and more. However, if you do find yourself serving in an organization where you truly are experiencing a significant amount of burnout, there is the option to consider finding a different organization to serve in. And the end goal here to alleviate the incongruity you feel within your job with regard to your value and the way the organization serves can be resolved in a very different way than you would need to resolve compassion fatigue and secondary or vicarious trauma. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as we talk about the signs and symptoms and the differences between these experiences. Compassion fatigue, however, is really an overexposure to suffering and pain that not only causes personal stress or distress, but classically in its definition causes the reduced ability to be empathetic. And this is associated with the work one does. So not where you work, but the work one does. And this is also considered a subtype of secondary trauma. If your compassion fatigue continues to evolve and worsen, you can certainly move into a secondary trauma situation or vicarious trauma. And this occurs when individuals begin to actually experience the symptoms that their patients or service community are experiencing. So they experience these symptoms as a result of indirect exposure to difficult or disturbing or traumatic situations and the stories from those suffering from that trauma. Now, many of the statistics I share with you today are focused specifically on both nurses and physicians, but the literature is also well documentative of the fact that social workers, all mental health providers, and we certainly know that community-based organization leaders feel compassion fatigue and secondary trauma and burnout just as much as our other medical provider colleagues. But just to illustrate this point, I wanted to share the fact that for nurses, over 40% of them report significant symptoms of burnout and or compassion fatigue, and that they're 2 times as likely to experience depression than those compared to the general population. The same is seen in physicians at the rate of 50% and even higher rates among medical students and residents. So it's not even about how long you've been in service. And there is a myth that compassion fatigue really is seen more with those that have been in the medical field for a long time. And the myth is also prevalent and probably more prevalent for those experiencing burnout, that you have to have been in the medical field for a long time to get kind of bitter and disenfranchised, and then you experience burnout. But we know that that's not true. And much of that points to the fact that we still need to do a better job in preparing all of our providers, mental health, community-based, medical, in their training to deal with compassion fatigue and to begin to build that resilience early on so that they don't have to experience that later in their careers or even early in their careers, but just to provide better coping so that they don't ever have to experience it. We know that these high rates of compassion fatigue impact healthcare quality, patient satisfaction, and drive turnover rates. I think even more troubling is the fact that suicide rates for providers, particularly female providers, are 130 times greater than the female population, and for male physicians, 40% greater than the male population. We also see personal consequences such as higher rates of divorce, substance use, and other mental health issues. So here I'd like to talk for a moment about the differences in what you might see between burnout, compassion fatigue, and secondary trauma. For burnout, many of the signs and symptoms revolve around the negative and disenfranchised state you feel with regard to your place of work. So initial signs and symptoms, or even late signs and symptoms, are often around fatigue, anger, cynicism, negativity, and eventually you'll start to see the provider withdraw from the care, even work they may have done, additional committee work. Those individuals that may have been eager to volunteer for a committee or a special project, you'll see them become more and more withdrawn. Again, the triggers for burnout would be related to the organization itself. So work-related attributes, work-related interactions, so those difficult colleague interactions may really trigger an uptick in symptoms for burnout. And then work organizational characteristics. If you have a highly regulatory or punitive workplace, you can see those types of characteristics really trigger symptoms of burnout within their employees. For compassion fatigue, again, think about the fact that the key component is a reduced ability to feel empathy. So as you become exposed to your patient population's trauma and adverse experiences, your ability to empathize and problem solve with them becomes hindered. And so you see symptoms of sadness and grief, somatic complaints, ineffective coping with increased addiction rates, even cognitive shifts, meaning you may find that you just don't think anything will work, or you don't think anything will be effective. There'll never be enough help to help everyone, and just decreased hopelessness around your ability to make a difference. You can also see increased arousal and nightmares or night terrors, and then eventually detachment and avoidance. So again, a furthering of that ability to feel empathy. Triggers to compassion fatigue can be particularly taxing or emotional, taxing empathy or emotional energy interactions. Again, some work-related attributes, very busy days, and then prolonged exposure to trauma experiences of clients. If you think about secondary trauma as either a progression of compassion fatigue or a very acute and more significant response to trauma, you can understand how you would not only see sadness, but you would see anxiety and apathy, more numbing, and even staff and providers can begin to have cognitive disturbances, have intrusive thoughts or imagery, can really lose all trust with regard to their patients, their organization, their own abilities, and even begin to lose their independence as a functioning provider. And then relational disturbances both at work and at home. Triggers for secondary trauma would certainly include previous trauma exposure, anytime that there's if you're doing any type of therapy where there might be a reenactment of the trauma, or any type of staged re-exposure to trauma with your patients, this could in fact trigger you. And then sensory re-triggering, such as sounds or smells, or even images, or feeling unsafe. Walking to your car at night after work in a very poorly lit parking lot certainly can re-trigger those feelings of anxiety and panic. So it's important to differentiate between these three important and significant stressors in a provider's life. And when I say provider, I mean that inclusively for all of us, not only, again, medical providers, but all of us in the helping profession. And the reason it is important is because there are really some different approaches that one needs to take when dealing and combating or healing from burnout, secondary trauma, and compassion fatigue. So there are many, many self-assessment tools available in the literature. This tool by Dr. Stam is actually my favorite tool because it looks at all three of the significant contributors that we've discussed today. And while this is a 30-question questionnaire based on a Likert scale rating, 1 being never, 2 rarely, 3 sometimes, and so on, the scoring of it is while it is a little bit complex, it is important because it gives you subsection scores indicating your burnout rate, your secondary trauma rate, and in this particular tool, it looks at a positive indicator around compassion fatigue, and that being compassion satisfaction. So it can really help to guide you in where you might need to address or focus your efforts in how you deal with or how you proceed in providing the appropriate self-care so that you can stay in your career and continue to help patients for a very, very long time. Each of the subsections have a score up to 50 points. Again, if you go to the website listed here for the ProQual tool itself, the Professional Quality of Life Scale. You're able to download it and take the test and really get some insight into how you might need to address your own professional practice. Regardless of what you think your score is, if you feel like you're at risk, then you probably are. As providers, we oftentimes do have self-awareness to the fact that we may not be as effective as we once were. We may have lost some of the vigor or enthusiasm we once felt around serving our patient populations. So it's critical that you address these concerns in an efficient and effective way as early as you can. And the best way to do that is to develop a self-care plan. I love this illustration over to the left where it talks about and gives some ideas for a daily self check-in. And I've been working in the latter part of 2020 and in 2021 to do some of these things myself. So I think it's important to find ideas that resonate with you. But these two first items on the right that have to do with your self-care plan are really important. So each day, find some quality time to spend alone and reflect. And if you take that time to stretch or meditate or journal, even 5 to 10 minutes can really build the self-awareness you need, the self-confidence, the self-assurance that you need to respond to your patients in a meaningful way. It can ground you in your beliefs, in the things that you hold of value and that you hold to be true, and help you to focus your efforts for the day. And whether you do that at the end of the day so that you're rejuvenated for the next day, or you do it in the morning, or you do it at lunchtime, it doesn't matter. It's about committing and executing on spending some quality time alone. The other thing that is critically important is to commit to hold one connected and meaningful conversation a day, whether that's with your partner, your parent, your child, or a colleague. Connectedness is one of the key aspects that keeps all of us from sliding into compassion fatigue. The isolation and the sadness and grief that one feels as they begin to experience compassion fatigue are directly combated when we connect to those individuals within our lives. So again, taking 5 minutes and having a connected and meaningful conversation is a critically important step in your self-care plan. If you take nothing else out of this presentation, I hope that you all will work on these 2 items alone in building your resilience, as they will carry you a long way in your professional career and help you to be able to live a legacy of helping. I think there's nothing more sad than to see a once energetic and enthusiastic provider succumb to compassion fatigue and lose their ability to serve. Not that they may not get back in the game later on, but if we can all care for each other a little better and care for ourselves, hopefully we can eliminate compassion fatigue and really further wellness in our communities like never before. If you are feeling this way, if you are starting to experience some compassion fatigue or secondary trauma, know that the sadness that you're feeling is normal. And really begin to start practicing and thinking about the domains of wellness. So at the Center for Youth Wellness, we we do a lot of intervention and work with our patient families who have experienced ACEs and toxic stress around building resilience. And we know from the literature that there are 7 key ways that directly combat toxic stress and buffer toxic stress and build resilience in individuals and families. And so it makes great sense for us to consider how we can take these on as providers. Not only is it a positive thing for us to reflect this behavior within our communities and to our patients, but it also builds resilience and helps us to buffer toxic stress and trauma. So building supportive relationships, eating healthy, sleeping well, using movement or exercising, practicing mindfulness, supporting our own mental health, and then spending time in nature are the 7 ways with which we can work through those domains of wellness. And I really want to talk a little further about self-care and just bring to mind that there are several important steps that we should proceed through as we build out our self-care plan. One is awareness. Really to be not only aware of where you might be in the spectrum of burnout, compassion fatigue, or vicarious trauma. Maybe you're not having any issues with that at all, but having some baseline awareness either through assessment, like the scale I shared with you earlier, or just doing a continual kind of mind-body check. If you're noticing that you're feeling more stress in your body at the end of every day, if you're having more of those somatic complaints, back pain, fatigue, GI disturbances, probe further, investigate further, and see if there's illness or if these might be some early warning signs of toxic stress. Again, work to have that balance within your life, not only in your personal life, but in your work life. A lot of the literature on self-care and compassion fatigue talk about the ability to effectively say no. And so making sure that you don't overcommit. Being mindful and combating the theory that, well, if I don't take on this project, nobody else will. That's not always a positive thing. It could be that if no one is ready to step up and take on that project, it might not be the right time in your organization. But really buffer and hold yourself accountable that you can't always be the one person that volunteers for everything. And if you find yourself doing that, you may be in the early stages of compassion fatigue, where you're actively trying to combat the apathy you're starting to feel. So please take time to rest and relax so that you can continue to be productive. Building connection. Again, this is a clear supporter of the domain of wellness around having supportive relationships, but it also helps to combat any issues you may be feeling around depression. So connection always directly combats the feelings of depression and isolation and gives you a safe place to process your feelings or struggles you may be experiencing at work. This also ties directly into debriefing. If you are a leader or even an informal leader in your organization, you serve as the person everyone goes to when they're having a hard day. Start bringing those topics up in discussion. When you've had a terrible day in the office, be the bold and gracious person that steps forward and says, hey, let's talk about what happened today. What did we learn? How can we do better tomorrow? How can I support you? What effect did this have on you? Here's what effect it had on me. In allowing for that open exchange and debriefing, you're making your workplace safer, you're making it more trauma informed, and you too are exemplifying self-care in that it's okay to talk about difficult things, and we come together and work for around solutions. So again, this is a very effective component of self-care that we really see at the organizational level. And then last but not least, in the ABCDEs of self care, know when you need to get outside help. And don't forget to check in with or engage with your employee assistance program. If you are experiencing some of the effects of long-term stress or toxic stress, please utilize these resources. Oftentimes, the sessions that can be provided in an EAP setting, the brief intervention, can really go a long way to decrease the symptoms you may be experiencing. And if you need further assistance beyond the EAP program, there's often a place for referrals and extra assistance to get you connected to a provider that can help you process your concerns a little bit more fully. I know for many of us, probably for all of us who have a cell phone, it is my greatest fear when I see that red bar show up on my cell phone and I know my battery's dying. And I hate it when that happens. It makes me feel anxious. So if we could all have that same type of care and concern when our own individual batteries are running down, and rush to plug in and get recharged, the world would be a much better place. So please don't ever think that self-care isn't a priority, that it's a luxury, or you'll do that later, or you'll do that when you take that really long vacation next year. This is something that needs to be attended to on a daily basis. And just like we need to recharge our cell phone batteries every day so that they can work for us the next day, we have to do the same thing with our bodies and our minds so that they can be there for us the next day and for our patients and communities that we serve. I'd like to pause here and take questions.
We do have a couple questions. Yep. So we have one: would feeling like you don't know what to do anymore to help clients be compassion fatigue, including guilt that you aren't doing enough or better?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That could also be a sign of burnout. If you actively feel like one of the hallmarks of burnout that could differentiate those particular set of symptoms versus compassion fatigue is if you feel like your organization is actively working against you to do the right thing. That would be more burnout. If you're feeling those symptoms in an otherwise supportive work environment, that very well can be the early stages of compassion fatigue. So if you are feeling that, please connect with some of your colleagues and see if you guys can come up with some solutions that will help you feel better about your interventions and also make you feel connected to the services you all are providing. That can oftentimes reinvigorate you. That was a great question. Thank you.
Next question: what is the best way to build accountability, mutual support for these practices within an organization? I'm thinking about how we are more likely to exercise when we schedule with a friend or self-care buddy check-in. Any creative solutions?
Yes. I think putting up a flyer in your organization, if you have the ability at lunch to have a walking club. I've done this in many organizations where we sort of ate on the run or ate while we walked, and walked a couple of times a week together to hold each other accountable, or had Some organizations provide gym memberships, so having groups that go together to the gym directly after work or meet to go to the gym before work, holding competitions around self-care rituals. You certainly do have to do it on an honor system, but having a competition within your organization that says, how many self-care hours have you logged this month, and even giving a $10 gift card to the highest winner sets the tone that that's important. And sometimes those types of small competitive things are just the incentive we need to get going. If we see others joining in, nobody likes FOMO. So fear of missing out can help you to start thinking about ways that you would like to take better care of yourself and join in the competition. So that was a great question too.
All right, one more question. What to do if you suffer from burnout and connecting to colleagues is not working, or there's no support from your workplace?
Unfortunately, the sources to combat burnout are somewhat limited when you are serving in an organization that does not seem to fit your values and personal mission. Certainly, vacation can help, but take a good vacation, take a week-long vacation, and turn your cell phone off or disengage from work. Really do not answer emails or texts. You have to protect the time that you have to disengage. Otherwise, you're not really taking a vacation. That would be my first suggestion and what is often suggested in the literature. Secondly, when you come back from work, advocate for yourself. If the end all be all is that you ultimately feel the need to leave that organization due to the gap in your personal values and the organizational values, then at least feel comfortable leaving knowing you've articulated your concerns, and you can leave with a clear mind and a clear heart, knowing that you've done your best to make a difference, you've done your best to advocate for positive change within the organization, and simply at the end of the day, if it's not a good fit, it's not worth losing your career over or making you so unhappy with your career that you wouldn't want to serve in any other organization. So that is why it's so important to understand the difference between burnout versus compassion fatigue, because compassion fatigue can really be treated with self-care and engaging in your co-workers and connections. With true burnout, you may have to leave the organization. But again, take a vacation first. Even if you had to take an unpaid vacation, it would be better than having to resign for fear of losing your career completely out of just disgust and demoralization. I know that none of us probably are living in a day and time where we feel comfortable taking an unpaid vacation. But if it meant me being able to continue to work as a nurse or a social worker, I certainly would consider it. I have been in a work environment that was so toxic I did have to leave, but it was not before I had developed a chronic inflammatory condition, and that I'm still battling. And I wish I had had the courage to recognize my symptoms earlier, but I have had some time to recover from that burnout, and am very blessed now to work at an organization that is so supportive of me, and that I love serving at, that it feels important to me every day. And I wouldn't want any of you to experience that. You never know which one of you will be the supportive relationship to a community member or a patient who's experiencing ACEs. And so if you're not there to serve, who will be? So I implore you to take good care of yourselves so that you can be there for this generation and inspire the next generation to serve just as you have.
Great. That was the end of the list, that list of questions.
All right. Any other questions before I just share?
I actually thought of one myself, Carissa. What do you do if you find that you are seeing somebody else at your workplace who is potentially suffering from compassion fatigue or burnout? How, what would be a way to approach them? What could you say? What could you do in that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So just trying to connect with that individual. So ask them to lunch. Ask them, what are you doing to take care of yourself? Talk about some of the things you're doing. Ask them if they'd like to join you. And if you, after you have spoken to your colleague, maybe informally, become more direct and say, I'm concerned about you. How can I help you? And if that doesn't work, certainly please go to your supervisor and try to intervene. It may be a discussion that the organization needs to have globally around compassion fatigue and burnout, and that some debriefing sessions could certainly help with. So if you don't feel like connecting, if you don't have the personal connection to engage with your colleague individually, do it from an organizational perspective, and then if all else fails, really bring that to your leadership's attention, because we know when we are experiencing compassion fatigue and burnout, we become more likely to make mistakes in our clinical or practice judgment, as well as a decreased capacity to meet patient needs, or our patients may experience that decreased connection with us, and again, may have poor satisfaction with our services. So it is important to protect ourselves and our organization and our practices and our patients as we see this occurring within our colleagues.
We did get one more question. It says, you talked a bit about screening in the beginning of the program, and I wondered what criteria is used or how it is done. And I'm not sure if this is referring to screening for ACEs or screening. I'm going to assume it's talking about the screen that you brought up on the screen and talked about.
So the professional quality of life screening is typically self-administered. It can be also administered through an EAP program if someone feels there are concerns about burnout or compassion fatigue with whom they're speaking to. It can be used certainly in clinical settings, and even at sort of a lunch and learn within your organization. You can administer the screening and then just talk amongst yourselves. Self-screen and process how you all might be feeling, or what are the experiences of your colleagues, and how would you support each other as you address not only burnout but compassion fatigue in your organization. So it can be used in many ways. The article by Dr. Stam doesn't talk extensively about how you would utilize that tool. It really talks a little bit more about research in these three areas, and what type of research needs to be done to further our understanding. But it's still a great article, and there's a very good discussion in the last couple of pages on how you would appropriately use that tool for yourself. Well, Well, all right. I want to thank you all so much for your time today. We've got just a few more minutes. I wanted to make sure that you had our information at the Center for Youth Wellness. If you have any questions about our organization, our website is the centerforyouthwellness.org, and my email address is shared with you as well. We will be sending out the presentation in PDF form for you to view, and the recording can be sent out as well. And please don't forget to fill out our ACEs Aware survey. It's important to us as a recipient of this funding that we provide information back to our funder, ACEs Aware, and it's been a real honor to be on with you today. I thank you all for your wonderful questions, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Please don't forget to take good care of yourselves. Thank you.
Thanks, Carissa. I have put the survey that she mentioned in the chat if you want to take it there. I did get one more question about the images with other members of the staff, and I think that is fine. So we'll send out the slides from this presentation, and feel free to share them widely. So thanks, everyone, and we hope to see you again on February 17th for our next presentation on cultural differences in ACEs screening. So hope to see you there. I'll send out the invitation soon, and you can sign up for that. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day.